brand drift.
Brand drift.
This can happen for different reasons.
Yeah.
Lately, I've seen a lot of takeovers and failed is probably a strong word.
Yeah.
But not unsuccessful leadership transitions.
Yes, that's a good way of putting it. Less than successful.
Less than optimal.
Less than optimal.
And there's a lot of reasons for this. Sometimes it's not understanding the soul of the thing that you're taking the reins for.
Yeah.
It's a different, and it's probably the same thing, but a difference in values and goals. What are you trying to do? Are you trying to just maximize revenues?
Right.
Are you trying to capture the market?
Yeah.
Steve Jobs had an interesting response when it came to market penetration. Everyone's like, well, you only have 15% of the market. That's awful.
Yeah.
He's like, well, Mercedes has whatever, and they're doing fine.
Yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, if you think about it like that,
yeah,
why you don't, that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Right. But if you bring in somebody who's like, no, we just want to dominate and whatever, it's like, well, you got different goals. You're going to not do what made you work in the first place and so on. And sometimes you need someone fresh to come in and steer things back in the right direction.
Yes.
Which is fairly rare these days.
Yeah.
That goes well, but there's some examples of that. I mean, I think Starbucks is an interesting case of how's that going to turn out right now.
Right.
I think it's going in the right direction, but I also think that part of Starbucks' issue was a lack of strength in leadership.
Yep.
Like I love Schultz.
Yeah.
And every time he left, the company just faltered.
Right. Which he has to take some responsibility for.
But going back to his memo, which I like, about the soul of a brand, he's like, well, you can't really put it into words. And I'm like, well, I think that's kind of a lazy response.
Yeah.
And you can do better than that, right?
Yeah.
You're just kind of avoiding the problem. You're like,
Yeah.
well, what are you going to do?
Right.
But then he attributes it to some things, and it's a symptom of those things are symptoms of the core issue, like prioritizing mobile over the in-store experience, because it's like, we're just doing mobile pickup.
Right.
We're just a coffee shop. Like
Right.
There's no competitive advantage there.
Yeah.
Anyone can just stand up, order on an app and get coffee. And it's not the experience. That's not the whole thing it was built around.
Right.
So he says that's sort of where the issue started. And I don't think that he's dug into that deeply enough.
I agree with you.
But he has acknowledged the issue. And every time he comes back, or just, because he'd leave and then come back, it sort of course correct.
Yes.
But that's an example of the founder. He's not really the founder, but
He really is.
he's the founder of the company as it is.
Yeah,
he's not the founder
of Starbucks that we know.
Yes.
Right. He took over a brand that was a good little brand.
Took over a coffee shop.
Took over a coffee
Or
shop.
like 3 coffee shops,
Right.
right?
With maybe with some roaster facilities. Who knows? It doesn't really matter. Right. But, it's just like, is Ray Kroc the founder of McDonald's? No. But yes.
The movie about that is called The Founder. So it's like they're making a point, but they're like, no, he's the founder of the company.
He's the founder, right? Yeah. And Schultz is the founder of Starbucks.
Yeah.
Right? This topic, I don't know why this topic is something that I'm deeply passionate about, but I am, right? And I think that whether you're the day one founder, or you're basically the founder of the company that became well known.
Well, it's like if you're the actual biological father, or your stepfather, but you've been there since they were 2.
Yeah.
It's like your dad.
Your dad, right?
Yeah.
And I think that, and we should do some research on that. How many times have I said that in this podcast? But we should do some research on this. I believe there's a soul of a company, and that soul of the company, whether you're the founder or the day one founder or the founder for all practical purposes, you put that in place. And I believe that the vast, vast majority of great companies have founders who created great companies because they got the power of creating a company with a soul, right? And so, and the term I started using within the last 24 hours that I shared with you this morning is you have effectives and you have efficients, right? And the effectives are the ones who, right, see the bigger picture and understand sort of the softer side and understand the art of what is being sold, of what is being presented, the storytelling, the why this matters, and the essence of the soul. And then the efficients are the numbers people, right? And what I believe happens, and what caused us to want to have this podcast today, this topic, brand drift, was that literally within the last week, there were 2 articles, one on Southwest and one on Versace. And in both situations, we have an efficient, right, changing things that were at the core of the soul of these companies. And the companies are now struggling, right? And, Southwest used to be all about the common man, right? And Southwest was, it was bags for free and it was low fares and no first class. Everybody got
go and
peanuts.
sit down.
Go and sit down. There's no assigned seats, right? It was just like this democratization of the airline experience. Because if you go back prior to that, right, people used to wear suits and ties and dresses to go on the planes. It was a luxury thing. And so that was what they stood for. And now all of a sudden within the last week, right, they're going and they're contemplating doing first class. They're charging for baggage, assigned seating. I mean, it's just really, really sounding differently. And when you read why, there's an efficient-oriented CEO who's trying to drive growth. But the problem is that when you veer away from the soul of the company, all of a sudden, we've talked about on numerous occasions, all those ideal stakeholders who are attracted, and those include your customers, are like, this isn't what I signed up for. And Versace, if you study that story, I mean, it went from bold, amazing colors to literally black and brown.
I think that's emblematic of society as a whole right now, but which is it's a side thing. Good at playing it safe,
Right.
but in both, because I think effectiveness is the goal, and efficiency can serve effectiveness.
Yes.
And if efficiency does not serve effectiveness, then don't do that, right? It was like, oh, it's one or the other. It's like, no, you have one matters, and then one serves the other thing.
Yes.
And you can use the increase efficiency to better be effective. And
Yes.
Southwest did that, right? We're only flying one plane.
Yes.
And because that makes everything very efficient, we don't need to worry about that.
Yeah.
And then that didn't work when that plane turned out to not be a great plane and that had issues. And they're like, well, we over-indexed on one specific model. That was a thing.
But they went decades, though, with that one plane.
Overall, you could say it was probably a good decision.
It was brilliant.
Yeah. And then now you just, you have 2 planes, or you better source the thing. And then, or you just don't use Boeing, because that's a whole other issue.
Uh-huh.
We don't need to get into that. And the same thing with Versace. Donatello was like, oh, well, we can bring these people and bring Capri in, and they'll help us become more effective through efficiency.
Right.
Like they'll help with the logistics and everything,
Yeah.
and they'll do all the things that we're not good at.
Yeah.
And that was never Idol's intention with going to Versace. He was like, well, I just want this. I want it to be mine, and I want to go Michael Kors with it. Which is, you could just make that stuff. Anyone can make that thing, right?
Yeah.
Anyone can do efficiency.
Right.
It's really hard to do effectiveness, because efficiency is, well, you just, especially with AI now, is like, well, you just have it run an analysis and tell you what you can do.
Yeah.
It's like just free consulting in that way.
Yeah.
But it's really hard to figure out the vision side of things. And we've been facing this issue a lot over the years, right? Where we had like a marketing 5 years ago, and it was all about an efficiency play. It's like, well, no, that doesn't work.
No.
And that's the only reason I think that's the reason I'm here today working at 90, is because that really bothered me.
Yeah.
And it's like, why does that bother me? And it took me years to figure out why that bothered me, and work through that and understand why that was a thing. But it is interesting how the efficiency, because the effective people want efficiencies, because then that makes them more effective.
Right.
But sometimes you lose yourself in that. And then for our EOS audience, there's a visionary integrator issue there.
Yeah.
And some integrators are very good at balancing those things. Like I think Tim Cook is an integrator who can balance the effective and efficient side of things. leans a little bit more efficient than I think is ideal.
Yeah, I'm on the same page.
But
Yeah. And then so, you know, and what my perspective is that these of the efficients over-index on efficiency to the and then the brand starts to drift, and then the ideal stakeholders start to drift away, right? And you know, one thing that I observed for decades as someone who's studied not just businesses but sort of the game of business is you have a lot of times where you'll have a visionary CEO who does a good job of following the founder. And then, you know, we all kind of appreciate the yin to our yangs. And for me, Jack Welch going to, horrible that I forget his name, but his successor, right? He went from visionary to efficiency, way over indexed, and GE became, you know, a shadow of itself. And so you have these yin yang things that go on. Schultz is probably showing that exact thing, right? Where you go from an effectiveness person who appreciates efficiency people, you end up handing the reins to an efficiency CEO because, yeah, you weren't as efficient as you could be. And you know that, right? It's a thing that you want to see improve. But then all of a sudden, the efficiency people start to lose the soul. And they start pushing stuff and they start being short-term oriented, right? And one of the areas where you and I were talking about, a fascinating area where we see this is in the automotive industry, in the car industry, right?
yeah, auto industry is I've been weirdly fascinated with it since I was like 5.
Yeah.
So, yeah, thinking about the stuff at that point with especially Ferrari. I loved Ferrari, and it's been that leadership journey has been very interesting over the last 20 years.
Yeah.
And I remember back when they said, we will never make more than 7,000 cars. We will never make an SUV. We don't care about that stuff. That's not who we are.
Yeah.
And everything was very cohesive on their path and what they stood for and what they valued and what they wanted to do. And now they've, so right with Montezemolo, then we had Sergio Machone, and then I don't know then they took it from Fiat and spun it off. And Sergio was more of an efficiency person than he was.
But he respected the soul.
But he respected the soul, and he stood by those things. But very much is just these are hard boundaries.
Yeah.
Not like, well, you didn't. I don't think he understood and made the why behind the things is explicit. Because you listen to Enzo Ferrari talk about all this stuff, and he's just as David Senra from the Founders Podcast would say, he speaks about his company and his products like you would a lover. He describes them as beautiful, and he hates to see them go racing because he just sees his car out there dying. And right, that's the passion of the founder.
Right.
And it's like no one in leadership Ferrari thinks that way anymore.
Yeah.
There's like, how can we make more? And I think we looked it up, and they're making around 14,000 cars now.
Yeah.
So double what they said they were never going to make more than.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things that are downstream from that, like they have their loyalty VIP system where you get allocations for cars, and that's not as strong as it used to be. And it took 5 years for that to see an effect, but they're creating cars. The allocations aren't being. They have to get stricter because they have a lot of money coming in for people that want these things, but it's not the same culture behind it. Right? You get a lot of people from the Middle East going in and buying these things and filling out their garages with it so that they can, they're treating it like a rewards program for a credit card.
Right.
Rather than like, well, they love the car and they want to go race, and it's an obligation, not a passion anymore.
Yeah.
And well, when you treat it like that, it's like, that's what you're going to get.
Yeah.
That's just not who they are. Right? Lamborghini can do that because Lamborghini is just like, screw it, let's have fun, see what happens. Right? That's their brand.
Right.
They don't care
right
about that stuff, and
Yeah.
it's fine. And they do. And so when they do something wacky, like they put out an SUV, it's like, all right, doesn't mean anything.
It's Lamborghini.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Ferrari and then versus Porsche has done a fantastic job of sticking to the thing. And part of that's just because of the 911. They didn't have the 911, it'd be like, it's a trickier issue because they're going electric with a lot of things, and they like to push the boundaries, and they're very German. So like, the electric is more efficient. It is faster, and so that's all they care about.
Yeah.
And so, but that's them.
Yeah.
And so they can do that, but then they also respect the 911, and that, right, that's just been such a slow, iterative development over time.
Incredible.
Which is beautiful, and then there's a whole culture around that.
Yeah.
But then they can make an SUV, and it makes sense. But they never claimed they weren't going to make an SUV.
Yeah.
Right? Because the 911 is just basically goes back to the Ferdinand Porsche days of, well, let's make a Super Beetle. And then there's some darker stuff in that, but that's fine.
Yeah.
And it shows like how you can, everyone wants to cancel brands and stuff these days. And it's like, well, you know, he was like in the SS, he was a Nazi. It's like, but Hitler loved him, he loved Hitler, but right. It's like, well, it's really fine now.
Yeah.
No one really seems to care about that.
Right.
Not saying you should cancel Porsche, just an interesting fact of history. Yeah. And then, all right, so we got 2 more on the car end. One being Aston Martin.
Yeah.
Who's always been a strong brand, but it's very British, and like, oh, the interiors kind of suck. They're not very reliable, but it's James Bond.
Right.
And so we'll see with all of these things that having a great brand, as Roy Sutherland would say, having a great brand allows you to play the game of capitalism on easy mode.
Yeah.
And so if you're like, oh, this is easy, and then you play efficiencies, like you'll see a huge spike right away, and that will taper off. And you're like, well, what's happening? We didn't do anything different. And it's like, well, you got rid of you're changing the mode of the game you're playing, right? So if you lose the brand, it's like, well, you're not gonna have anything special. And then, well, now you're just another retailer or just another manufacturer.
Yeah.
So coming to Aston Martin, having that great brand hasn't really suffered anything. It just kind of lagged behind and got lazy. And then Lawrence Stroll came in, and he's just like, we're raising standards. It's like, I don't care. Just pump money into it, make it great. And so now their interiors, which is crazy that over like 3 years, just all the cars' interiors are now very nice. They're not as grand and everything as Bentley, but they've caught up. It's not an issue with the car anymore.
Yeah.
And they're like, we're going to make V12s until we're not allowed to make V12s anymore.
Yeah.
And so they understand the brand, they understand what they're doing. They're pushing it, but they're doing a good job at riding that line.
Yeah.
And I think he respects the soul, and he raised the standards. And that's an efficiency for effectiveness play. Yeah. And then you look at Jaguar, which is, they lost the brand, because the brand is, I don't know if we can do this. There's a video, Top Gear clip from years ago, Jeremy Clarkson on the E-Type, specifically the Eagle E-Type, but for all intents and purposes, the E-Type, and why it's so iconic. Yeah. It's just a British car, and it's beautifully done. And so if you want to understand the soul of Jaguar, just watch that video, just like a Top Gear, Jeremy Clarkson, Eagle E-Type. And they just lost that. And then they're like, well, let's make an SUV, and then make it a smaller SUV, and then make an electric SUV. And then they kind of had the F-Type, which is close. And then they're like, well, let's just let that do whatever. And then we killed that. Right. And then so it's like, then their sales suffer, because if you don't have the halo car, the thing that represents the soul, what are you? It's like, if Porsche gets rid of the 911, well, you know, they'll be able to ride that out for 10 years, and then what happens? If Jeep gets rid of the Wrangler, what are they going to do? Yeah. And then that's an even bigger issue, because Jeep and all of the Fiat stuff kind of rides on the Wrangler. Yeah. An issue, because that's their strongest brand. Yeah. And I don't think Stellantis is well run, but then they have, well, they're not well run, because I don't even think they have any leadership right now, because they all just turned over because they were bad. But Jaguar's thing was, well, nothing's working. Let's just blow it up and see what happens. Let's write it's a Seth Godin thing of, burning down a house is a lousy way to renovate, but it's a great way to draw a crowd. I think I got that backwards, but I think it's a yeah,
that's pretty good.
It draws a crowd, but it's a lousy way to renovate. Yeah, but that's kind of what they're doing. Yeah, and like, screw it. And I understand where they're trying to go, because if you go up market, everyone wants to go up market when the economy is favorable. Yeah, some things are more sensitive than others to market fluctuations. Elasticity is the right word. Yeah. So like McDonald's is a inferior good is the right word. Yeah, inferior good, but then they're trying to go up markets, and if then it crashes, and like,
Right.
well, they lost that.
Yeah.
Great. But when the market's good, right, you want to go up market. And so Jaguar's like, well, let's make $300,000 cars that are like Rolls Royce, but for younger people, because Rolls is kind of dated. And it's like, well, they're doing fine. I don't think their design language is good right now, but that's another story.
Right.
The Cullinan. But they're like, well, let's just do that. There's just a lot of money there. And so they did that, and then they marketed it towards people that would, I guess, appreciate it and be like, that's cool, but they don't have the means to buy it, and they don't really understand why it would be good. And so you could do I was hearing somebody talk about, like, a very smart person, well read on all things businesses, brands, and founders. And you say, well, I don't really care for art. It doesn't matter. And so I was like, well, that's an interesting thing to think about from a Lovinger's perspective.
Right.
Right. And I think the appreciation for art is also the same appreciation for the soul of a brand.
Yeah.
Right. You just push. And if you're super dogmatic and intelligent, you can squeeze efficiency out of anything.
Right.
Right. That's not hard to do.
No, but it's very short-term oriented.
It's very short-term oriented.
Yeah.
And it is hard in terms of it takes a lot of effort and everything, and you got to work really hard and have experience doing that. But it's not as rare of an ability as building is a vision or continuing that, because you really got to understand and unpack the soul and then respect it and honor it and push it forward into the future and interpret it and extrapolate it. But it's right in the earlier stages, your interest in art, it's like, well, you have immediate gratification, concrete thinking. Well, art doesn't help me because it doesn't make me money, right? Or then you move up, and it's like, well, it doesn't. There's no transactional benefit to it, or you just like art because your group does,
right?
You're a conformist, right?
Yeah.
If you, and then, or if your group doesn't like art, then like, well, I don't like art either,
right?
And then you don't understand, like, you get it, and you go like, oh yeah, I get it, but I don't personally find any value in it. I guess some people like it. But I don't find meaning in it. And then that's what, like 5, 6-ish self-aware.
Yeah.
And then as you go up, you can recognize the deeper significance, even if you don't personally connect with it. But then you're also able to see, eventually then you're like, well, you see art as a profound expression of the human experience.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't have that, then, well, the rest of the stuff doesn't really matter. And so it does, even though it seems superfluous, and when it's like, no, you need that.
Right.
And and it goes back to your Versace thing of trading color and expressive detail and the craftsmanship for something that's safe and muted and dull. And it's just, that's not the point. Right. Fashion in that way is supposed to be provocative. It's supposed to be exploratory. It's supposed to take something that, well, we like this, and then what if we push this further? Doesn't mean that whatever was on the runway you should go buy.
Right.
That's not the point of it.
Right.
So there's a very long-winded way of going through the car industry and then back into the fashion thing.
Into fashion, and then back into the soul. And we were talking earlier about, before we started this, about Hermes.
So Hermes, if you look at Capri versus LVMH, LVMH, they were playing very different games. Capri's like, let's maximize revenues. Let's make this work, right? We're going to turn this around. We could sell it. It'd be great. Because I do think, right, I would like to know more about their strategy, but it does seem like they have an exit plan.
There certainly seem like they're playing for an exit as opposed to long-term game of creating value. Unfortunately, right, the value of Capri right now is basically equal to what they paid for Versace. So the entire so everything else in Capri, either Versace's worth half, or probably worth half of what it was, maybe even worse. And other parts of it now, that it's all basically, all the value that they had is gone if you say that Versace is still worth what it was. But the reality is Versace's probably worth half, and the other part's probably worth half of what it was when they did the Versace acquisition.
Well, now it's just going to go down because Donatella's gone. It's like, you still had something.
Right.
Now she's out. Like, well, anyone that actually really cares about Versace, because if you just want designer stuff, there's a bunch of brands.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of brands where the name, the designer is still in-house. And it's very much an American thing of like, well, let's just take it and squeeze it and then go on.
Right.
Versus LVMH of, which is when you could argue against them, but it's much more territorial. I think that'd be the shadow side of things, where it's like, we love that, we want to respect that, but we want it to be ours. And they're like, we never intend on selling it, ever.
And they respect the brand.
And they do respect the brand.
Oh, all of their brands. And how many brands do they have?
A lot.
I mean, it's 30, 40, 50. It's a big number. It's more than that.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah.
Big company. But you hear the way, going back to the Enzo Ferrari thing, the way that Bernard and the children talk about the brands, like they're very, very specific on how they think of them. So if you say something is a luxury brand, they're like, no, it's ultra premium, or it's premium. It's not a luxury thing, right? Because they don't, and you say, well, technically it is luxury. And it's like, well, no, but it matters the way that they interpret it. Because what is the meaning behind luxury? What is the meaning behind premium? And they think, to them, they won't buy a brand that doesn't align with their core values.
Right.
They don't care how much money it'll make.
Yep.
Which is not the point. And then they want to basically smooth out the efficiency side of things while keeping the effectiveness.
Preserving the core.
They want to preserve the core, but make it easier for the brands to do what they do.
Yeah.
If they're in an interview and somebody's like, well, you do this, and I'm like, no, we don't. And they're very adamant about that.
Yeah.
And I think there's an element of the disagreeable, we've been talking about earlier.
Yeah.
And a lot of these brands are built with such a strong soul because the founders just disagreed. It was like, I'm doing it this way.
Yeah.
I don't care.
Right.
Right. And there's that fire, that passion in it. And it's like, well, if you're playing an efficiency game, well, a bunch of other people can help you play the efficiency game, and you should let them.
Yeah.
But if you're playing the effectiveness game and somebody wants to stomp out that soul,
yeah,
you're not going to let them do that. And so you need the right people, or you need to be the right kind of person to play that game. The LVMH, and Bernard's tried very hard to take over a certain brand that would be the crown jewel in the thing, and that is Hermes. And Hermes is very much like, we're doing this. They value craftsmanship over anything. And so everything's handmade, but they're not stubborn on that. It's like, well, if a machine can make it better than a person, then we'll switch. But that's valuing the product over the perception.
Right.
Which I think you should do in business. That's why we're here. Right?
Yeah.
And you do that well, and you're a good person, sociable person. It's like, well, then the perception thing will take care of itself. Hermes's strategy of doing that, sticking to that thing, and they can't scale infinitely, obviously, because, well, they have to be made a certain way, and there's savoir faire, and everyone has to go to school, right, and learn and apprentice to be in that. And then, well, it takes 2 years to do that. I don't know how many years it actually takes, but say 2 years to do that, then 5 years so you can work on something else, and then like 10 years so that you can do, move up to like a Birkin bag. And though that intention and attention to detail is what makes them so strong.
Yeah.
And so Bernard's just like, that's the most beautiful thing in the world to him. But then if you look at their numbers, they have a 71% gross margin and reported revenues of 15 billion with a market cap of 260 billion. So that's pretty crazy.
It's unbelievable.
Right. And they're you could say they're playing capitalism in easy mode.
Yeah.
But it's just, they're so restrained, and that's what keeps them doing that. And they're just going to keep moving up.
Yeah. And
because they're less susceptible to the market. Because if everyone else goes, people are still going to go to Hermes. Because that's what has the most value. And so everyone else, right? Because when the demand so exceeds supply, it's like, well, they have a lot of buffer. Because they're not even trying to maximize revenues. Right? Their stuff secondhand goes for way more than it does from them.
And how old's that company now?
Let's see.
I want to say 100+ years old, right?
1837. So they started off as...
So 188.
They're coming up on 200 years.
Coming up on 200 years.
They started off leather.
Yeah.
For I think saddles.
I think it was saddles, and then they went to trunks. I mean, to luggage for the back of horse-drawn carriages.
Well, and that's why the logo's a carriage.
Yeah.
Coach ripped off, but whatever.
Yeah.
And that's we make stuff like this. We have these standards, and we serve this clientele. And so we make leather. We could do leather. We can do saddles. Well, now we can do luggage, and then we can do bags, and we can do all these things. And they're very customer focused, right? Like they're two big things, like the Birkin bag and are both like, well, someone was on a plane with, I don't know, for one of those bags, it was like someone was on a plane sitting next to someone and they're like, well, I would like a bag, you know. I think it was Jane Birkin, but if it's Kelly, I'm sorry. Brought a basket onto a plane.
Yeah, yeah.
Because she wanted to put all her stuff in it. She couldn't get a good looking bag that handled everything.
Yeah.
And she's like, oh, that's stupid. And he's like, well, let me just make you a better bag. And then that's how that was born.
Yeah.
And then so she used that from now on.
Yeah.
And because it handled everything, it looked good, it was well made.
Yeah.
Right. And this stuff lasts forever. And that's another thing with LVMH is they want things that are built to last.
Yeah.
And so lifetime warranties, all those things are very important to them.
Right.
So when they acquired Rimowa, they put that in place. It's like if you buy a Rimowa after 2022, it's a lifetime warranty on the thing. But right, that goes to represent the values of the company.
What's interesting is, once again, this would be cool to research. And this is not a hard one to research. We could ChatGPT this one, right? Or Grok it, or whatever your deep research preferences are. Would it be a stretch to say that when we look at all the great brands, they all really leaned into being customer centric? They knew who their customer was or is, and they built a very high trust relationship with the customer. Would that be safe to say?
Well, for the most part, so I'd say yes, but I think that's because most of these great brands were somebody that either was very close with and respected the customer, or they were the customer. Like
Right.
Steve Jobs, like he's the customer.
Yeah.
Right. I don't think Hermes would fall into that category. I don't think a lot of the luxury. I think a lot of the other designers, they just designed for themselves. Right. That was a creative expression, and they did what they loved, but they did it with a singleness of purpose, and they were extremely talented. Right. So Disney would fall into that category.
Right.
Balenciaga. And like you go to all the rest of the fashion houses that are great. Like, they did that, and they loved that, and they did it. They wouldn't, even if they didn't make money doing it, like they're still gonna do it. Even if they were Van Gogh, they'd still do the painting, right?
It's what as you know, I shared with you. I was at a conference, this A360. Well done, Peter Diamandis, this last week, and the last speaker was Lucky Palmer from Anduril, and he was talking about how when he got funding for his first company, Oculus, right? Mm-hmm. He was like, I told them all, I don't know whether, I can't promise you you're going to make money. And then he's like, what they basically did was they funded him to do his hobby 12 hours a day. He's like, this is the greatest thing in the world, right? I would do this without getting paid. Now I've got all this backing, and I have this potential to create a great company, and I'm doing what I would have done anyway. It's like, you're paying people to go to, I forget what he said exactly.
He said, I'm conning people into paying me billions to do what I love. That's basically what he said.
Yeah.
And that's true.
Yeah.
Or is it not a con?
Right.
But that mindset of I just want to do this thing allows you to be so simple in your mission and not, right? So Steve Jobs would say that you're a complicated man, and that was an insult from him.
Yeah.
Because you want a thing to be simple. And so when you're simple, that breeds focus.
Yeah.
And then that focus creates a simple product.
Yeah.
And everyone wants a simple product, right? It's human nature to complicate things, but we love simplicity, which is a fascinating little dichotomy. But being so passionate about it to the point where you're just blind and oblivious to everything else that's going on usually creates something pretty interesting.
Yeah.
If you have the right traits and the right people around you. Right. But usually those are all symptomatic of the traits.
Yeah.
In doing that, you are serving people. Because if you go about creating a company or entrepreneurship as, well, there's a hole here, I'm gonna go fill that hole.
Right. Without any interest in the hole. It's just because it's a hole.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of people that, well, it's like, where can I go do that? It's like, well, you're thinking about it wrong.
Yeah.
All right. You got to find the intersection of passion, purpose, and potential, and then find that and then pursue that single-mindedly.
Yeah. Passion, purpose, potential, and something that you're willing to persist at for 10, 20 years, right?
Yeah. I would say if it's the right passion
Yeah.
and it's the right purpose, you should do it. You should keep doing that.
Yeah.
But people
And
appreciate novelty
right.
probably more than they should.
Yeah. But the potential, passion, purpose, and potential. We've never really had this conversation, but
I just made that up.
I like it.
So yeah.
Yeah. But the potential is TAM, right?
Well, it's TAM. There's two sides to that. There's TAM, and there's, are you the right person for this?
Right.
Are you ambitious enough? Are you intelligent enough? Are you depending on the industry, right? We could go into the other traits,
right?
Right? Are you mature enough?
Right.
Right. There's some of it's objective,
right,
or inherent, and some of it's depending on where you are in your life.
Yeah.
Right. So if you could say, well, potentially in 30 years you could do this. It's like, well, that's not really doesn't really work, right?
Right.
If it's a journey stage thing, like, or a journey based thing, like loving yours stage, or the company stage, or but certain, if you're a ISFP,
right,
and you're trying to, I don't know, like you pick any of those things, right? But you're trying to go into a certain industry, it's like, well, I mean, you're probably not going to be really cut out for that. You're going to cut against the grain, even though you're passionate about this thing.
Right.
So, well, you're not going to be passionate about the thing that you have to do long term. Right? Like you're a very data oriented person, and you're going to a creative industry, and like, well, I like this because I can go make it's very inefficient. I can make it efficient.
Right.
So okay, now you go down that hole, and then what?
Yeah.
Right, the potential's not there.
Right.
So potential's a nuanced one.
Yeah.
We know that most of, I mean, we've done the research on the Myers-Briggs stuff, and how much of it's NT? It's like 90% plus.
On visionary founders.
Yeah, visionary founders.
And then you go to legacy founders, which is interesting. It's a broader spectrum of personality types, specifically temperaments, right? Because they're going into an industry that's already been created. They have a vision for a better company, a better competitor. Sam Walton, a good example. And so they see the efficiency opportunity, and in retail that's not atypical, right? They're going into a known industry, specifically like mass retail, like Walmart, and they're going into a known industry, and they're just going to play the game smarter. They see how to play the game smarter. They're fascinated by the game. I mean, Sam was like, he'd stop at every store, every competitor, just loves studying the game of retail, right?
And this all built up, like Costco's another example of that. We're like, oh, let's just do this and let's do it better. And they kind of fell into that, but it's the same thing.
Right.
It's all price, right? Because let's just play the game better.
Yeah. There's a broader array of personalities, I think, with legacy entrepreneurs versus visionary entrepreneurs. But
to create something out of nothing is
hard.
Much more difficult.
Yeah.
So you're gonna have a narrower scope as to who is best suitable to do that exceedingly and uncommonly well.
Right. And then back to sort of the beginning of all this in brand drift, right? Then it's like, okay, so specifically, if and fashion's a really interesting category, as obviously we talked about cars earlier, but even though there's lots of different car companies and lots of different fashion companies, the companies that were started, they had a strong point of view about what specifically they were going to build and what that market looked like and what their ICP looked like.
Very, very clear.
Very clear, right?
Balenciaga is it's just creative, but he was very, very clear in terms of who he was serving, and what they wanted, and how he wanted that experience to be for them, and how he wanted to change that. And then the wording was very, like, you don't just wear the dress, you present the dress, you bequeath it to your daughter or whatever, right? All these things he was very adamant about, because he's understood it so well. And he's like, well, just make it for the best of the best. And like, because he wants to make the best thing, and who can pay for the best thing? It's like, well, the people with the most money.
Right.
And that's how a lot of that stuff starts. And then some of them fall off, and then it takes, right, and that's an LVMH thing, like, oh, well, this is a great brand that is not being well run right now. So let's just go run it well and respect what
And
made it great in the first place.
Yeah, go back to the foundation.
Yeah. And then you'll see some people can take brands and revive them, but then they leave and it starts to falter again. Like Gucci and Tom Ford. Tom Ford came in, brought it back, made it great, and then he leaves, and it's like, ugh. And I think someone came in, they have a new person now running it, who seems to be doing a better job. But I don't know that
Who owns
story
Gucci?
well. What's the? It's the.
Tapestry?
No, all right, I'm gonna look this
It's
up.
not Capri. It's not Tapestry.
No,
it's not
I know.
LVMH.
If you said the name, I'd know it.
But it is one of. It is a
It's
holder
the other
of
one.
multi.
Kering. I should have known that. Kering is like the next biggest one.
Okay.
They own Gucci, Balenciaga, Yves Saint Laurent, and other things.
Yeah. Brand drift, right? I mean, it's like, it's just back to the whole Founders Mode series. It's, you have a strong point of view on just a limited number of things, your culture, your ICP, your unique value proposition. Obviously, there's either a purpose, a passion, or a cause. We don't talk about purpose, passion, cause as much as we talk about passion and purpose, right?
But I think purpose, cause is in purpose.
Yeah.
Like there's a purpose behind the thing that's
Yeah.
bigger than yourself.
Yeah.
Right. And
So-
and then you go.
So basically, it gets down to either passion or purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Lucky was about passion. And he laughs about, no, I didn't have this big grandiose, right?
Well, and most people don't. I think you sort of, passion is, you need passion. And then you kind of can fall into purpose.
Yeah.
Because purpose is the intersection of, well, what am I passionate about? And then also what matters. You look at that from an ikigai perspective.
Yeah.
Which is another useful framework. It's probably just a different version of purpose, passion, potential.
Yeah.
Which is probably just a better version because I didn't make it up right now. But you sort of fall into purpose, right? Because I don't think that before 90 I thought I was gonna really find purpose in B2B SaaS, right? You know?
Yeah.
Like, I really don't care, but I also think coming from a place outside of that is helpful.
Yeah.
Right, from being able to, because it's I don't whatever. I was gonna go biblical reference there, but again, I was like, we go a whole archetypal thing here. But like the king has to come from outside the kingdom in order to revive the kingdom, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Which is you could say is like a nickel, right? Because if the kingdom is bad, you're probably not going to find someone within that that's going to resurrect it.
Right.
Like, I don't think Starbucks should have promoted somebody to run it rather than going to hiring Brian Nickel. That probably wouldn't work. Same with Aston Martin, even though they weren't really bad.
Right.
Right. That's Lawrence buying that isn't because he just wanted to help his son's racing career, which is so stupid. But now it's turned out well.
Yeah.
For everything, even though you could argue whether or not they should do a driver swap. But you fall into those things, and I think that'd be the same for Schultz. I don't think he was like, oh, I'm gonna go create a great coffee brand, global coffee brand.
Mhm.
I don't think that's what he was doing. But you did kind of in line, and you fall into it, and then you're like, oh, this matters,
Right.
And there's something beyond just me,
Right.
I'm just the steward of this vehicle at this moment in time, at this flash,
Right.
in history.
Yeah.
And I have a responsibility to carry it and to do well with all the ideal stakeholders.
You can see the potential.
And there's potential. And you
Yeah.
do all these little overlap things. I'm thinking about how you outline that model. Yeah. Things start to drift when you lose sight.
Yeah.
If you're in a boat and you don't have your North Star and you just a cloudy day and you start to drift away.
Yeah.
Because there's currents, there's things you don't understand, there's things you don't see, and you could be sailing really fast in the wrong direction.
Yeah. That's exactly right. You know, and all of a sudden it's like, yeah, if you don't know where you're going and you're like, let's go faster. That may not work out so well.
And there are times where that works accidentally.
Yeah.
And Parasite, the movie. I love Parasite, but at the time I thought it was accidentally great. Because there's a lot of things where I'm like, wow, that's brilliant. And then you look at how the director thought of it and like, huh, that's not why I thought that was so smart. And then you're like, okay, well, I don't think you're thinking about things as well as you could from a storytelling and archetypal perspective. You're
Right.
trying to focus on current events and issues and whatever. And then he just came out with another movie called Mickey 17. I've heard not good reviews about it, and now I want to see it because there's 3 movies from him that are well known. Be Snowpiercer, which is fine. Parasite was amazing, and then Mickey 17. And so I think that Parasite was an accidental success.
Right.
For example, the flood scene is biblical. That's archetypal, right? There's all these things that are happening, and they're moving themselves deeper and deeper and deeper, and they're not thinking ahead. So when that flood comes, it ruins them, like the protagonist family, and everything just lines up so beautifully in that. And according to the director, is like, well, no, that's just about climate change. And you're like, oh, like you could do both, right?
Yeah.
You could have it for the right reason, but also accomplish your other goal.
Yeah.
And I don't think he thought through it all. And sometimes that works well, and sometimes that doesn't work. So you look at movies that are consciously influenced by archetypes, like Lion King, which is brilliant, but it's unconsciously and consciously informed. There's a bunch of things where like they have like a marching scene. You're like, well, that's World War II. That's Nazi stuff, right? I'm like, okay. And then there's some things where it's like, oh, there's a fruit, and I don't think there's like the fruit's like the sun, and it's ripe and rebirth and all that sort of thing. Then you'll get Pinocchio, and none of that's conscious. All that's just like, well, that felt, Disney's like, that seems right. And you just have a bunch of really creative and intelligent people in a room, and they're throwing things out like, that doesn't work, this doesn't work. But then everyone's like, oh, that works, that makes sense. And getting stuck in the belly of a whale rationally makes 0 sense. But if you break it down psychologically and from a union perspective, it's like, oh, that's crazy that they just did that in the 40s or whatever.
Right.
And so sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work, but it takes the right person to consistently do it right without knowing why. And eventually they'll learn why.
Or not.
For those who do it right, I don't think there's a case where like someone had a streak of doing this really well for 10 years,
right,
or indefinitely, and didn't figure it out.
Yeah, I think the metaphor that works really, really well here is, when you play a single game, luck matters a lot. You play 100 games, and it's all about skill and understanding, right?
There's a lot of one-hit wonders out there. Yeah, it's just like some stuff sticks.
Yeah, but if you get lucky, and that's awesome, right? But if you want to play the long game, you need to know where you're going, and you need to take advantage of the compounding of all the knowledge that comes through the game you're playing. And if you have a decent TAM, which we're putting underneath potential, right? And the purpose is one that will go almost forever, right? And you're passionate about that game so that you come back every day and suffer the slings and arrows.
And you're passionate about playing the game, playing it the way that you want to play it, right?
Yeah.
And so you put your principles, because I think all of these companies, all these founders have their either intuitive or explicit set of principles.
That would be our 4th P.
I think you put that under because you're passionate about the principles, but you could say it's another P.
Yeah, because you can be really passionate and be completely unprincipled.
Yes.
And that's just another version of not having a North Star, and not having, maybe it's different between the North Star and having instruments that help you even in the fog.
Having a compass.
Yep, having a compass.
Your compass is your principles, and that's right. And how you use the compass is the direction.
And then the great founders, I believe, have done enough of this thinking. Sometimes maybe it's more intuitive. Maybe that's a Schultz thing.
But I think a Schultz or Jobs, it's very intuitive.
Yeah.
But Jobs was so amazing at clearly communicating those things.
Yes.
That when he would say them, whoever he said it to and whoever was in the room really internalized it.
Yeah.
And then you look at like a Brian Chesky, and he's like, we don't do core values, we just have principles.
Yeah.
It's like, it's stupid. Here's like 20 things. Don't, like, this is what we do.
Right.
And you look at a lot of service-oriented companies or hotels, they have their list of principles.
Yeah.
And values, and it's like, they have them separated.
Right.
I think Ritz-Carlton has a very fascinating page on that.
Yeah.
It's like, this is what you do, and you don't veer from this.
Right.
Right. And that's a Red Bull. Dietrich Mateschitz had a very defined list of things, and some of them are obvious and some of them are not. Like, one of them is you don't get drunk in public.
Right.
And that's just an extension of him, but he's like, you don't do that.
Yeah.
And there's a bunch of other things, and like he didn't do PR, he did like anti-PR kind of a thing. And
Yeah.
It's but all of those things are coming from the same source, and so they tell the same story, and that's what
It's all
creates a strong
coherent.
signal for the brand.
And eventually it becomes very ingrained within the company so that the company does not end up experiencing brand drift. And even if it does, going back to Warren Buffett's, one of his things that he said, you know, you want to buy a company that is so strong that it could survive the leadership of a fool, because it's inevitable that one day there will be a fool who runs the company, right? And so now I think maybe this is part of the LVMH story, right? It's
That's exactly the LVMH story.
Yeah. Right? It's like, no, the founder built something special. It's even proven by the fact that a fool took it over and went off, you know, sort of went off the rails in terms of the brand. But the brand still is powerful, and so we can take it over and bring it back and set it on the proper course, set it straight again.
With a good crew.
With a good crew.
Yeah. You see a lot of the crew, like someone comes in and it's like, well, now I'm here, and so you just clean house, and then you put better leadership in, and a lot of times that works.
Yeah.
Because, well, you think that, why do you think the company's not doing well if it's a strong brand? It's like, well, it's probably bad leadership.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know,
by definition.
And even if you have good people in there, it's like, well, you just kind of got to start fresh a little bit because of the habits. And that's an agreeable, disagreeable thing, right?
Yep.
You could be just like, screw it. I mean, or you could try spending 6 months to just sort through that mess.
Yeah.
But these people tend to be impatient.
Yep.
So
don't know where that characteristic comes from.
It takes a lot to ruin a great brand.
Yeah.
I don't, I was on the Acquired podcast, I think it was on the LVMH one, they were arguing like, well, what would it take to just ruin a brand? It's like, we do this, and like, but even if you did that and you wait 10 years, you could probably bring it back pretty well.
Yeah.
Right. And then going back to the Porsche point, it's like, well, if your product's great and you stand by it and you have the values, right? You can survive beyond whatever that issue was. And there'd probably be other examples of that.
It'd be another interesting conversation, not today because we're probably running close to time here, is, okay, so we talked about brand drift, and that with great brands, you can bring them back on course. Now the other question before that one is, what's it take to build a great brand? Right? Because you can be a great founder, right, and have your vision, but that doesn't mean you're going to create a great brand, because there's a lot of stuff that needs to take place, right? So that you can get the, 3, 4, 5, 10, how many years, right? Does it take for you to be able to consistently be doing those things and adhering to those principles and pursuing that passion and that purpose and pursuing the potential and pursuing, that was the other P we came up with, right? Was the
purpose, passion, potential, principles.
And the principles, right? How long does it take now to really build a great brand?
Well, I mean, that depends on a lot of things.
Yeah.
I don't think that's right, because you could say Palmer Luckey. It's like, well, he built stuff pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Right. And some people, it takes a lot of time because you do something really small and it grows and it grows.
Right.
And it doesn't, but it's just it doesn't do anything catastrophic along that way.
Right.
You reach a point where it's sort of an exit velocity if you keep pushing. But also, most of the founders don't really run into that issue because of the principles dimension.
Yep.
So if the founder's there and they have that issue, it's like, well, that's emblematic of deeper foundational immaturities, developmental inconsistencies, discordant qualities. So if you run into that, that's a separate thing. Right. But then when it comes to the survivorship or the legacy of the brand, it's like, that's a different story.
Yeah.
Because you can screw up. You could pull a Bud Light.
Right.
And like, now they're fine.
Yeah.
They're very self-aware about it. Everything they've put out in the last year has been,
Pretty much
authentic core Bud Light.
back on brand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's just, and I think, they screwed up. They didn't handle it well. That was a leadership issue. And then they've course corrected.
Right.
They're fine.
Yeah.
Right. Jaguar could just go dead for a year and then come back with a new E-Type. They could literally just build the E-Type again.
Yeah.
Exactly the same, and then make it electric or something.
Right.
Or not, right? But even if they did make it electric, they'd be fine.
Right. Well, it's interesting too. You look at International Harvester and the Scout.
Yeah, that came back and I'm like, oh, great. Even though you could rationally argue, oh, it's just not a Rivian. It is kind of like a Rivian. It's
Right.
like a more off-roady Rivian.
Right.
But it looks like it's going to do really well. Myers makes the dune buggy thing, right? They're going to come out with an electric version of that. It looks pretty cool.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, let's just take the thing. Nobody really liked the fact that it was motorized. It's just like, just make it electric. No one's driving a long distance. Range doesn't matter.
Right.
Make it clean and easy and
Yeah.
fun. Like, all right, let's do that. And it's like, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Right. VW lost sight of that. They killed off the bug in the bus. Like, well, now do you make Passats? I don't know. And they didn't really understand the Subaru, same thing, right? A lot of cars where that's an issue. But, Jeep, Porsche, two of the strongest brands because of one car. Like, well, it doesn't ride well or it's rear engine. Right? They have something stupid, but they keep that thing because it matters.
Yeah.
And they honor that and they respect it.
Yeah.
And they know that people in the future will as well.
Yeah.
And that is the artistic expression that makes life fascinating.